Hey Adam, this is Tom. Getting ready to go through an area between Buellton and Gaviota where I'll probably drop cell service for a bit, but I'll jump back on when I'm done.
Okay, we are live.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Monday, June 14th at 10:01 a.m. And today we are here for the Local Agency Formation Commission's Ad Hoc Advisory Committee for Rainbow and Municipal Water District and Fallbrook Public Utility District reorganization proposals. So without further ado, we'll get this meeting commenced and we will move on to the next item, which will be the roll call by the commission clerk, please.
Brian Albright.
Here.
Jack Beebe.
Here.
Rachel Cortez.
Here.
Gary Croucher.
Here.
Nick Canettis. Is not present. Tom Kennedy.
I'm here via telephone.
Sandy Curl.
Here.
Lydia Romero. Lydia Romero is absent. Kimberly Thorner.
Present.
So you have 7 present with the virtual quorum. So ends roll call.
Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that. We will move on to item number 3, which is the agenda review by the moderator. I'd actually like to take this time to bring up 2 subject matters that I just want to provide some brief comment and context to. The first one is LAFCO staff and myself, we received communication that the County Water Authority walked away from our last meeting with a different interpretation of what was offered and agreed to by this committee with respect to allowing subject agencies or committee members to have one-on-one meetings with Dr. Hanneman. This was offered since some of the comments were expressed that the material presented by Dr. Hanneman was extensive and it would take time to digest within the 2-week comment period that material. Therefore, this opportunity was made available for anyone with the intent to communicate their comments or questions in a more efficient and timely fashion to Dr. Hanneman. Nonetheless, LAFCO staff and myself believe the resulting Fallbrook and Rainbow meeting with Dr. Hanneman was appropriate and involved very broad strokes to the subject matter, which Dr. Hanneman will note very briefly in his update on the next item. I would also like to express that these opportunities will remain available for all members so that we can keep our matters on schedule and move forward accordingly. The second issue I'd like to bring up, and I'm not quite sure if David is with us here, but it's been brought to our attention that David Cherishorn no longer sits on the County Water Authority board. Therefore, his eligibility for the ad hoc committee is no longer. However, he is more than welcome to participate, and we will treat his participation as a member of the public and keep that participation in sync accordingly. So those are the 2 items I just wanted to bring up very briefly. And if any questions or comments to those, I'd be more than happy to field any of that. And if not, I would like to move on to item number 4, which is the public comment. So having seen none or hear none, I will move on.
Adam, I had my hand up.
Oh, I apologize, Gary, go ahead.
No, okay. We'll have the replacement for Cherishorn to you this week. We're talking to one of our individuals right now and just confirming he has the time available. So we'll have that to you shortly. And then just on the comment about the interactions with Dr. Hanneman, the just question, was the input that was received, I know the letters that were received after the deadline, or were those accepted after the deadline, not the meeting itself, but the letters that, because they commented on the water authorities letter, and I know that was put in just before the deadline. So just not sure how that occurred, if it was done in time for the deadline.
It's my understanding that all communication that we've received, whether it's before or after, has been included into the administrative record, and it's been posted on our website. If there's anything that has been missing from that, please inform me and we will get that posted. So
No, all good. I just wondered if that was received by the deadline that was given. That was the direct question.
understood.
Could I just address that? I haven't used any information received after the deadline, and I'll explain in my presentation momentarily.
No,
Thank you,
and I
Dr.
guess, Adam, my question was more, was all the comments received by the deadline, or were the comments that were received and put into record after the deadline?
Just so what comments are you referencing?
The written comments that were supposed to be due, that where the Rainbow and Fallbrook commented on the water authorities comments, so that if we had turned ours in just prior to the deadline, I'm not sure how any other agency had commented on ours and still made it in by the deadline. I know we had put in an email at the time of the deadline asking if anybody else had put in, and never received a comment back. So I was just seeing if the written comments that were put in were received by the agreed upon timeline.
Keen, why don't you help me out here? I think I see your hand raised here.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Keen Simons, an observer, executive officer. So, Gary, to your comment, all the comments that we received up into the deadline were posted and made available to the professor. The comments, the written comment that I believe you are referencing were a joint letter by Fallbrook and Rainbow responding to your comments. Those are part of the public record, but were not forwarded specifically to the professor to review and digest as part of his analysis.
That answers. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Keen. I appreciate that. Okay, if there's any more questions or comments, we will move forward to item number 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to provide comments on a non-agenda topic germane to the advisory committee. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I will check with our commission clerk to see if there's any members of the public wishing to speak at this time.
We did not receive any from the public.
Perfect. Thank you, Tammy.
And then,
We'll.
I apologize, Adam. So we do have this setup here where Tammy is observing those who have pre-registered to comment, and then as you see fit, you can check in with Erica. She's kind of watching our inbox, if you will. And just for the record, we do have committee member Lydia Romero joining us. Tammy, I think she joined about 5 minutes ago. And then Supervisor Anderson has joined us as an observer, as a commission member as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for those notations, and welcome everybody. So there's no public comments received pre-hand. I'll check with Erica. Is there anything that's received at this point in time?
So far, no public comments received.
Okay, thank you. We will now move on to our business items. It's number 5 on the agenda. We will move to 5A, which is the approval of the action minutes for our May 10th, 2021 meeting. The advisory committee will review these draft minutes prepared by the commission clerk. We will need a motion and a second to approve.
So moved. Kim Thorner.
Mike Croucher.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And can we move to Tammy for a roll call vote?
Brian Albright,
Aye.
Jack Beebe,
Yes.
Rachel Cortez,
Yes.
Gary Croucher,
Yes.
Nick Canetis, he's absent. Tom Kennedy,
Aye.
Sandy Curl,
Yes.
Lydia Romero,
Aye.
Kimberly Thorner,
Aye.
We have 8 in favor, 0 opposed, with 1 absent. So it's a roll call.
Perfect. So that motion passes to the vote as indicated through the commission clerk. Okay, we will move on to the next item, which is item 5B, which is the first consultant report from Dr. Hanneman. Dr. Hanneman will give a brief update on his ongoing analysis to the water reliability, which he presented in his draft form at our last meeting. So I will give Dr. Hanneman the floor at this point in time.
Thank you. Do you want to open the PDF? So I have a PDF of today's meeting, which addresses, if you go to the next page, if you move to slide 2. So I'm going to talk about the supply reliability analysis and then go on to readiness. And if you go to the next slide. So as this indicates, I have actually not updated the analysis this month. Well, let me back up. I received 2 items of feedback. And one was a Zoom call on May 21st. And the main thrust I took away from that was that I extend my analysis to cover the scenarios A and C, which I didn't do last month and which I will do. And I received a written memo from the Water Authority and also Easton's draft urban water management plan. I decided to set this, the reliability analysis aside for 2 reasons. One is the financial analysis that I'm going to present took up an enormous amount of time because there was an enormous amount of detail. And also I thought, by the end of this month, all of the water management plans will have been finalized. And it made sense to update the reliability analysis later this month with the final versions of the water management plans in hand. And I just note here, I'd like to get Rainbow's open water management plan because I don't think I have that. So next month, I will update the reliability analysis I presented last month, which focused on the authority and on Easton, but didn't address Metropolitan's supply reliability. And in the analysis next month, I'll do my best to address that question. That was one of the issues raised by the authority in its memorandum of May 24th. So that's where the reliability analysis stands. And if there are no questions or comments, I'll go on to the rate impact analysis.
Dr. Henneman, can you check your mic? We are getting some static from your side. So I'm not sure, maybe move the mic closer to you or.
Yes. Let me do that. Excuse me. Come here, Mike. I was leaning back. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Does that work better?
So. I will put the PowerPoint back.
I should lean forward. Thank you. Okay.
So just real quick, I'll jump in here just to, as Dr. Hanneman suggested, if there's any comments or questions at this point in time with his ongoing analysis to the reliability. If there's any hands, I don't see any. So as that's just an informational only item, we can now move forward to his next presentation, which would be
Adam.
Yes.
The next slide.
Sorry, Adam.
Sorry, Jack.
For some
Go
reason,
ahead.
even though we've been doing this for a year now, I can't.
I know.
managed to raise my hand.
It's hard with his Zeus presentations up. I can't really see everybody, so
It's got me confused. No, I didn't raise it because I couldn't figure it out. The
Okay.
one other item, since I just want to make sure we're fully clear in our discussions we had with Dr. Hanneman. And again, our reasoning for this was sometimes it's more efficient to have a conversation than to keep writing letters past each other. So we thought, instead of writing a long letter, we would just reiterate some of the items that we largely raised in the meeting we were all in. The other item that was noted in the meeting in sort of an offhand way, but wasn't really included much in the analysis, was the idea of weighing in about, do preferential rights weigh in more than the water shortage allocation plan? That was our other concern, was to make a decision over the fact that preferential rights override the water shortage allocation plan that's adopted by the MWD board. And really to, if we're going to get involved in that discussion, that's a pretty in-depth discussion that would need to occur with, legal assessments and other ones. So that, just to note, that was our other concern, was relative to, trying to make a decision relative to the weight of those different items. And not just relying
but I agree. Yeah, no, I think you made that point at the meeting as well. I mean, last May as well as the Zoom. And so let me say, I understand. The way I dealt with this in my written report is I mentioned that on the one hand, the authority makes the point about the preferential right. And on the other hand, a letter from Metropolitan says, I'm paraphrasing, that has no effect. So I noted both points of view. And I stated something like, I'm not going to make a judgment on this issue. I'm just noting the points of view that have been expressed. And I don't intend to make any judgments. And as you said, Jack, this is surely a legal issue, so it's way above my pay grade.
okay. Just Dr. Hanneman, maybe adjust your mic one more time, a little more feedback right there as you talk. So just sorry to keep noting that, but I see Sandy has her hand up as well now that I can see everybody. So Sandy, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And Jack, I really appreciate your comments and sharing your conversation. I think the point for us is that when you put things in writing, everybody has an opportunity to observe it and know what the statements are. The one-on-one meetings, there's not really that opportunity for back and forth. So I appreciate you sharing your comments. I would just reiterate that the preferential rights is a much more complicated conversation, and I think one that would be important to have in terms of talking about reliability at Met. But I understand, the focus is on Eastern. There was quite a bit of conversation in the draft report about the supplies that Met had and the surety that they were always going to get their Colorado River allocation. And we took some exception to that in quite some detail based upon current conditions and their commitments under the drought contingency plan. So if either we're kind of going all in or not, and if we're going to have these conversations, it needs to be looked at in totality. So that would just be my thought. But I think at a minimum, and if we have a one-on-one conversation, I'm happy for it to all be reported out to this group. I think in the vein of transparency, it's important we understand where everybody's at and what their arguments are so that we have an opportunity to respond and vice versa. So appreciate the opportunity to share those thoughts with you.
Thank you, Sandy, and duly noted for those comments. Does anybody else have any questions or comments to the brief report on Dr. Hanneman's continued analysis on reliability? Okay, having seen none and hear none, I will move on to the next item, which is item 5C, which is Dr. Hanneman's preliminary analysis on the impact to water rates. And I will pass the baton back over to you, Dr. Hanneman.
Adam, tell me if the microphone it has problems. My computer, I think, has decided to disintegrate. The monitor died yesterday afternoon, and the keyboard died yesterday. And so maybe the microphone is joining it in some sort of suicide pact. So if we go to
well,
back
at this
to
point in
the
time,
slide.
so far so good. So keep going.
Okay. Well, so if we go back due to the slides. I have this presentation, and I have two other items. A spreadsheet with various worksheets and a written report. I will transmit the spreadsheet and the written report to Adam right after we finish. I'll be drawing on the tables and in this presentation. So after we're done, there'll be three items: the text of this presentation, the spreadsheet, and the written report. The analysis has 8 components as listed here. And so I'm going to go through each item in turn. And let me say, what I've looked at so far is the impact overall on the water authority's rates. Actually, I should correct that. I've looked at the impact on the water authority's net revenue. I haven't yet translated that to the actual rate structure, and I haven't looked at the impacts for Fallbrook and Rainbow on their rates, and that I will do next month. So this is an analysis of the impact on the authority's net revenue. And before we get into it, let me add this caution. I've drawn on a large number of financial documents, but primarily Carolo's rate report for calendar year, for this calendar year, 2021, delivered last May, if I remember. The approved budget for the authority's approved budget for fiscal year 2020, and the CAFA, the comprehensive, whatever it is, something of comprehensive annual financial reports for fiscal year 20. There's a lot of detail, and some of the items that interest me are not broken out in the report. Some of the, also some things have changed between fiscal year 2020 and this calendar year. And so I'm sure some details in the numbers I present may be erroneous. I mean, not by design. So there may be many points on which members of the committee need to correct me. And at the end of the meeting today, we should figure out the best way of doing it. It may be through another Zoom with open to everybody or whatever. I'll leave that to Adam to figure out. But I just wanted to alert you that I've been putting together financial documents. Some apply to a fiscal year, some apply to a calendar year, some are the approved budget ex ante, some are from the CAFA with the actual budget, and so on. So I'm trying to put different numbers together in a consistent manner. Next slide, please. Adam. So this is the preliminary analysis and I'm looking at the exit jointly of Fallbrook and Rainbow. So you can take what I did, I can take what I did and do it for Fallbrook and Rainbow separately. And as I say, I haven't yet looked at the impact on the water rates charged by Fallbrook and Rainbow to their users. Next slide. So I start out by asking two questions. If Fallbrook and Rainbow stop being served by the authority, how would that affect the amount of revenue received annually by the authority? And then the second question is going to be, if they leave the authority, how does that affect the costs incurred by the authority to operate its water supply system? And both of these, revenues and costs, have two components, a fixed component and a variable component. Some revenues are fixed, others vary with the amount of water delivered. Some expenditures are fixed, some vary with the amount of water delivered. And so I need to disentangle the fixed and variable components of revenue and of cost before going on to the question at hand, which is the next slide, which is, if they leave, how does this, actually I should correct this. What I'm analyzing here is, how does that affect the net revenue earned by the authority? And then from that, I'd look at how it has set rates and how that might change its rates. So what I'm focusing on right now is actually the impact on the authority's net revenue. Next slide, please. So the single most important point is the role of fixed costs. And I'll illustrate this up front with a simplistic hypothetical example, where Metropolitan is the wholesale supplier. And suppose, for the sake of argument, the authority takes 1 acre-foot less of untreated water from Metropolitan. So the authority then saves $777 under Metropolitan's current rate. That's less expenditure by the authority, and Metropolitan loses revenue amounting to $777. Metropolitan loses a revenue of $777. How much cost does it avoid? If it avoided a cost of $777, then this would be revenue neutral for Metropolitan. But in fact, that's not the case. So, for example, part of the $777 is a conveyance charge of $373. But most of that is a fixed cost for Metropolitan. So if it delivers an acre-foot less to the authority, it doesn't save $373 in cost. Some of the supply rate of $243 is also a fixed cost and wouldn't be saved. And some of the power rate of $161 is also a fixed cost. Next slide. So the bottom line is, Metropolitan would receive less revenue in the amount of $777, but its costs would fall by less. So its net revenue would actually fall. That's fixed versus variable costs. But in the water context, there's another concept which I want to emphasize. And again, I'm doing it through an entirely hypothetical example. So take Metropolitan's power rate of $161. And let's assume this is all variable cost, which may or may not be true. Okay. But suppose, hypothetically, Metropolitan has a contractual commitment to buy 5,000 kilowatt hours of electricity from the State Water Project at $161 or whatever the cost is per kilowatt hour. Then the $161 per acre foot becomes in effect a fixed cost, because Metropolitan is committed to buying a certain chunk of power. And even if it doesn't need that power because it's delivering less water, it still has to pay for the power. Next slide. So this is the conclusion. You have variable costs and fixed costs. But if you have a purchase commitment for variable costs, that makes them fixed costs too. That's the point. And the second key point is, go back a minute. And the second key point, fixed costs are the crucial problem in the economics of water supply. For any water agency, fixed costs are a financial burden to a supplier if and when its sales decline. And we'll see this play out in my analysis of the authority's revenue. So now, next slide. So this is just some background from data I've cited, and the report has the references to the documents, but so the Fallbrook and Rainbow in fiscal year 20 were 1.7% of the population, 8.1% of the acreage. They received 32% of the total agricultural delivery by the authority, and 4.6% of the total M&I use. And combining those, they received 6.43% of all the water delivered. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the revenue structure, and I'm going to do this and the rest of this talk through a series of tables. My written report explains the items in the tables. And so the best thing will be to read the written report along with the tables. These tables also appear in the written report. But I thought the most effective way of going through the material is just to go through a sequence of tables. So next slide, please. This is just the rates and charges by the authority this calendar year. So they really fall into three groups. There are volumetric charges, which are items A, B, C, D, and those vary with the number of acre feet delivered. Then there are fixed charges, which is items E, F, G, H. And those consist of dollar amounts, if you like, of revenue requirement that are allocated in varying ways among the member agencies. E and F, E, F, and G are allocated based so for example, item E, $25.6 million is to be raised across all the member agencies. And it's raised based on a moving average of each agency's share in the total amount of water delivered by the authority to that agency as a share of the total amount of water delivered to all agencies in a rolling 3-year period. The storage charge and the reliability are based on shares not of all water, but of water for M&I use delivered to agencies. And F is on a 3-year rolling average, and G is on a 5-year rolling average. E is a total pot of money divided based on the number of meter, divided among agencies based on the number of meter equivalents. So that's, it's a charge per meter equivalent. So you have the volumetric charges A, B, C, D. you have volumetric rates, you have charges, E, F, G, H, and then you have other items. I and J are levied basically on all the properties in the authority's service area. So they vary with the property value in the area. Metropolitan levies a charge parallel to I and J, which I'm going to exclude from my analysis. So all of the properties in local agencies, service areas, pay the authority's version of I&J plus Metropolitan's version of I&J. They transfer the Metropolitan RTS and charge to the authority, and the authority passes it on to Met. And then K&L charges that apply when a new meter is added, when a developer builds something, or when meters are upgraded. And those charges vary with the meter capacity, and the numbers here are for meters less than 1 inch. So that's the rates, and these are for the calendar year 2021, not for the fiscal year. So I'm now going to go on to an analysis of revenues. That's the next slide, please, table 2. I'm sorry, this is very cluttered. So let me explain what's going on here. I have 2 main data sources: the adopted budget and for fiscal 2020, and the CAFA for fiscal 2020. The CAFA shows what actual expenditures turned out to be. The adopted budget is the plan for expenditures, but things always change. The amount of water delivered isn't exactly the amount that was expected, and other things change. So the most authoritative statement of expenditures is the CAFA. However, the CAFA aggregates most of the water revenues into a broad lump called water sales. So if you want to understand the breakdown between variable revenue and fixed revenue, you can't get that from the CAFA. You can get it from the adopted budget. So what I've had to do is take the detail on the water revenue side from the adopted budget and try and meld it with the actual expenditure data reported in the CAFA, which lacks the detail. And the bottom line is, so the information on the left is the breakdown with all the detail that comes from the adopted budget. The table on the right is my estimate mapping that onto what actually happened. So, for example, total water sales were planned at $632 million, but came in at $565 million. One item is the pass-through, which is mainly their pass-throughs to Metropolitan, and their pass-throughs also for desalinated water purchased by Vallecillos and Carlsbad Water District. So the pass-throughs are $39.6 million. So as far as I'm concerned, the pass-throughs are relevant to my analysis. So if you look on the right-hand side, from my perspective, the revenue actually received in fiscal 2020 by the authority was $526 million. But if you include the pass-throughs, it would be $565 million, and you compare that with the planned revenues from the adopted budget of 632 million, and you see the difference. Less revenue was earned. It'll also turn out, if you look higher up, less water was delivered, 346,000 acre feet instead of 408,000 acre feet. But the reason for doing the analysis on the right was, if my assumptions are correct, the commodity rates, the variable revenues, accounted for 75.9%, 76% of all water sales. So if that's right, 24% of revenue from water sales is fixed revenue that doesn't vary in a given year. If the authority delivers an acre foot more or less, 76% of the revenue is variable. And now if you go to the next slide.
Dr. Hanneman, can I pause you 1 second?
Of course, yes.
Just want to check in. I'm still receiving some intermittent kind of feedback and stuff, and I just wanted to make sure that we pause here, and if Du's receiving the same stuff, to see if we have any sort of remedy here. I want to make.
I have another microphone that I could swap out.
If you
your
want,
mic is near any speakers, or maybe you just put the mic more in front of you.
It is 6 inches from me. I mean, it's true. This is as close as I can get while still seeing.
Yeah, now you sound fine, but for a little while it was staticky.
Yeah, let me just pull the wire. Okay, I can move it. I have a tangle of wires here. Okay.
Yeah, sorry to keep interrupting. I just want to make sure we're all receiving.
No, I'm glad.
Your information in a clear manner, and because there's a lot of thoroughness to this, and I just want to make sure we're all receiving it so that we can comprehend and understand it as you go. So,
yeah, the microphone was working okay on Friday, so it's acting up for the first time.
Understood. Okay, if you want to keep proceeding, maybe I pause you again, but it sounds to be a little better than before. So.
No, I'm sorry. I'm of course unaware, so I can't help. And I'll go on unless it's useful if anybody wants to say something or ask something.
Well, Keen, go ahead.
Well, Professor, I just had a question just so I understand this. So based on your 2020, you can deduce that 3/4 of all water authority revenue generated from water sales is a variable, and then the remaining quarter is fixed. So no matter what happens in this world, likely, they're getting a quarter of this revenue that you can determine. Is that yes or no?
Yes, and the logic, the relevance of this is if Fallbrook and Rainbow leave, it will affect the volumetric, and it will affect some of the fixed charges, as I'll detail. So I'm sort of making a distinction between selling an acre foot less versus losing a member who uses an acre foot. So I will make use of this detail in the next slide.
Thank you so much.
2 slides from now. And then I'm going to do a similar analysis on the expenditure side, water-related expenditures and others, and then I'll figure out what's the reduction in expenditure. So this looks now at all the revenues, water-related and other, and my categorization of water-related is slightly different from the CAFA. So, for example, the row D, the availability standby charge, the CAFA doesn't list it as a water revenue, whereas to me it is. And so I've taken data from the CAFA and just sort of reorganized them under my own heading. So this is the bottom line. If you look at, so the total revenue received by the authority was almost $679 million. 39 million was a pass-through coming from the local agencies and passed on mainly to metropolitans. So I think that's kind of irrelevant. So if you subtract that out, the authority earned $639.3 million for fiscal 2020. And of that, the commodity rates was 62.5%, and fixed charges were another 24%, 19.5 plus 5.8 items B and C. Actually, the important thing is actually items A, B, C, D, E here would all be affected if Rainbow and Fallbrook leave. So that's they'd all be affected to some degree, and they account overall for 92% of the authority's revenue. And actually, property taxes would be affected to some degree, but I'm not able to do an analysis. So the items I list here, A, B, C, rows A, B, C, D, E, F, would all be affected. That's the main point. So now let me go on to the next slide, which introduces the next topic, which is the reduction in revenues if Fallbrook and Rainbow were not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an analysis for fiscal 2020. I'm going to say how much would the authority's revenue have been reduced if Rainbow and Fallbrook had not been in the service area in fiscal 2020.
We were still getting some more static. I'm not sure, should we try to keep proceeding or should we try a new mic?
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep interrupting here, but I'm in agreement with you, Du. It's kind of hard to understand and comprehend what's being said with the independent interference.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's just pause and see if we can get a new microphone. And then if that doesn't work, perhaps we can have Dr. Hanneman maybe call in by phone.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm dating myself, but he sounds like Max Headroom.
Oh.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's the bandwidth or something.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure if it's Du's the technical expert here, but I'm not sure if it's quite his Wi-Fi or if it's the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty hard to predict because sometimes it would be great and it'll just come back and forth, and he hasn't been moving as much, so hard to determine.
I think I have a spare camera. I think I don't have a spare mic. So could I use my cell phone? If we can figure that out.
Du, is there any chance you can walk him through the phone number to call in and have him mute his mic on his computer?
Oh. Let me look at the email. It has the call phone numbers on there. Give me a second.
Dr. Hanneman, I don't know if you can pull up your email, but I did email you the link to the meeting, to the Zoom meeting, and under that link had the phone number and the meeting ID.
Here's a number if you want to just dial it in now. 669-900-9128. Let me know when it's asking for the meeting ID.
Hello again. Oh.
Hi.
Dr. Henneman, you will probably have to turn off the speaker on your desktop.
Yes. Okay.
Not from the phone, but from the desktop. Leave the phone as is, but
Oh,
turn the
yes,
speaker on the desktop. Now you have to turn on the speaker on your phone.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll try to link the two videos together.
Thank you. How many economists does it take to speak?
Let's, before we proceed, I mean, I'm not quite sure if this is better.
Yeah, we're still getting some static, huh?
There's an echo now.
Yeah, it's quite echoey. It's quite in the distance, and if I had my
Maybe we'll
choice, I would
try it
prefer the
again
other
with the
one.
normal mic and turn off the phone. One more try.
Say that again.
Let's turn off the phone, and then we're gonna try the mic one more time. Your normal computer mic.
Dr. Hanneman, are you back through the computer? Let's see how that sounds.
I think I am.
Okay, I think that's our best option, whether we get some intermittent interference at all, because this sounds completely better than the phone. So we'll do our best, and we'll continue on. So Dr. Hanneman, why don't you just continue, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So go to the next slide. So what I have here is the quantities of water for M&I and agriculture purchased by Fallbrook-Rainbow in fiscal year 2020. And I'm using calendar year 2021 rates and charges. And the total in the right-hand column is a loss of revenue of $36.8 million. But that excludes these bottom rows: property taxes, standby charge revenue, and the capacity charges. And with the information right now, I'm unable to calculate the reduction in those revenues. I'm sure the authority and also Fallbrook-Rainbow would actually have the relevant information to fill in those rows. So under the assumption, same water use as fiscal 2020, but with the rates and charges applicable to calendar 2021, there's a revenue reduction of $36.8 million plus the items in those empty rows. So I'll now move on to the next slide, which is to look at expenses. And before we go any further, I have to point out that this is more difficult because on the cost side, the CAFA, which covers what actually happened, gives much less detail for water than it does for the revenue side. I have to rely entirely on the adopted budget to understand the breakdown of water costs. So if we go to the next slide, this is the breakdown of water supply expenses from the adopted budget, and it excludes the pass-throughs that I mentioned earlier. So this is without the pass-throughs. And you see a breakdown of costs to obtain water from Metropolitan, from IID with the canal lining, and from the Carlsbad plant, and also the treatment costs. So this is the full breakdown of supply expenses from the adopted budget, which amounts to $486 million. The next slide puts those expenses in relation to the total expenses by the authority in fiscal 2020. So you see the water supply expenses are 61, almost 62%. And then you see the other items. The other items are all fixed costs, essentially. Some of the water supply expenses, some of the $486 million is also a fixed cost. Some is a variable cost. So I'm going to have to figure that out. But that's the picture. Next slide. So a simple calculation, and I wouldn't place much weight, is if you compare what was in the adopted budget, what was planned for fiscal 2020, and what actually occurred according to the CAFA, you see a lower expenditure than was planned, and also less water was delivered than was planned. And if you just take the ratio of those two numbers, that's about $1,100 an acre foot. But you can't rely on that, because the reason expenditures were lower than planned is not just the amount of water delivered. Lots of other things changed between May 2019 and June 2020, when the fiscal year ended. So to get at this, go on to the next slide. So actually, there's only two numbers that matter. So they're going to be three costs that are avoided by the authority. Some portion of the supply cost, some portion of the transportation cost, and some portion of the treatment cost. For the transportation cost, I'm going to use $164 an acre foot. That was the rate proposed by Carollo. The board actually adopted a lower rate of $150 an acre foot, but the difference between those two amounts was money transferred from reserves to cover transportation. And so it wasn't necessarily a real cost reduction. So for simplicity, I'll use $164 as the cost per acre foot transported. The treatment rate is $295 per acre foot. So the big question is, what was the supply cost avoided by, that would have been avoided by the authority if it didn't deliver 22,000 acre feet to Fallbrook and Rainbow? Next slide. So there are three sources of water. IID, and also I should put the canals, the All-American and Coachella canals. desal water and water from Metropolitan. The melded cost of water from IID and the canals was given in a report, I think in January, by the authority as $1,028. If I'm wrong with these numbers, I mean, these are numbers I have found in reports, and they certainly can be corrected because the authority will have more up-to-date information. As I understand it, the rate charged this year or paid to Poseidon or whoever for the desal plant is $2,752 per acre foot, and Metropolitan's Tier 1 rate is $777. But, and this is the important point, the authority has in effect commitments to buy a certain amount of water from Imperial and to take a certain amount of water from the Carlsbad plant. And the future commitment to IID is 200,000 acre foot a year till whatever it is, 2035. And the commitment to Carlsbad is for the authority to take 42,000 acre feet. Valasitas and Carlsbad water authorities take 6,000 acre feet. So that brings the total from the Carlsbad minimum purchase from the minimum payment from the Carlsbad plant to 48,000 acre feet. And then there's the possibility of buying 8,000 acre feet more if that's desired. But the authority's minimum financial commitment for the Carlsbad plant, as I understand it, is 42,000 acre feet at $2,752 per acre foot. And it also has a commitment to take 200,000 acre feet at that price. The result is, if the total delivery requested from the authority is less than 242,000 acre feet, it still has to pay the amounts committed to IID and the Carlsbad plant. If the amount requested is larger than 242,000 acre feet, which it sure was in fiscal 2020, the additional water comes from Metropolitan. So the marginal cost for water to deliver an additional acre foot is Metropolitan's price of $777. And this leads to my last slide.
Real quick,
If you can,
Dr. Hanneman, I
yes.
think we have a member that would like to ask you a question. I think Sandy,
Oh,
you
of
have your
course.
hand up.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Dr. Hanneman, under our transfer agreement, our commitment is 280,000 acre feet of committed water a year, not 200,000. And I just wanted to mention that in our response on table 4.7 on page 57, we detailed the revenues minus the costs specifically that you're talking about. And I just wanted to note that because we outlined that all of those elements very specifically as well.
Sandy, thank you. I mentioned I didn't look at the memo because I thought I skimmed it, but I then set it aside the rate impact. So thank you. That's helpful. I knew about the 77,700 acre foot for the canals, and I didn't know how to fix it into so thank you. I'll correct this.
Thank you.
It's the relevant, the conclusion is that if the authority delivers an acre foot less to Fallbrook and Rainbow, that water will come from Metropolitan at whatever the tier 1 rate is. Plus, the authority's cost of treating it and transporting it. But thank you. So then we'll go on to the next slide. So if the authority delivers whatever it is, 22,279 acre-feet less to a member agency, it's the reduction in its costs comes to $1,236 by this assessment. That's an estimate. And so that would lead to a $27.5 million reduction in costs compared to a reduction in revenues of $36.8 million, plus the items property tax, capacity charge, and so on that I haven't yet been able to account for. So that means there's a reduction in net revenue of $9 million and counting, because I need to add in the property tax revenues and those other charges. So if these numbers hold up, or if they're refined, can you go on to the last slide? So I need to fix the numbers. I then need to translate the reduction in net revenue to just a sort of indication of how the rates would be changed. And then I need to go on to look at the impacts, the rate impacts on Fallbrook and Rainbow, but also that depends on metropolitan water districts' rates. And I think there are a number of changes that are likely to occur in its rate structure in the next few years, which I will also need to address as part of my analysis of the rate impact for Fallbrook and Rainbow. So that's my report today.
Thank you, Dr. Hanneman. Your mic was almost flawless in the second half, so give that some credit there. I don't know what magic pixie dust you did on the pause, but thank you regardless. Do we have any questions or comments for Dr. Hanneman at this point in time for his report today? Jack, I see your hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hanneman. I think the approach you laid out makes sense. I don't have any great, major issue at sort of first look. The only thought, the demand profile for Fallbrook and Rainbow, as you can tell, has sort of changed more dramatically than most of the other member agencies. So we sort of have this tailing fixed cost impact that's going to stabilize anyway, right? So because our demands have dropped so much, we still pay a higher percentage of that fixed cost. And then also for Fallbrook specifically, when you see our urban water management plan, our demands on the water authority regardless are going to drop by, almost half anyway because of local supply development. I don't want to overcomplicate this, but that, what it does mean is our impact regardless becomes much less. So this number using 2020 ends up being, conservative, largely for us is in a way. And I'm just trying to think, how do we, sort of capture that or address that side of it?
Can I just answer and say, yes, the thing to do, at least as a starting point, is to look at projections in the urban water management plans. I mean, how I use them is to be decided. I don't have Rainbow's urban water management plan. And so as I indicated, it made no sense for today to use the urban water management plans. But by the end of the month, I have everybody else's draft plan. I don't know if they'll change much, but I thought as part of the revision of this analysis next month, I'll look at demand projections and do some analysis based on that. That means what I present next month will still be a draft, because I'll be showing you my preliminary projections of future demands, which I didn't present today. And I'll be presenting my analysis of the impact on rates for Fallbrook and Rainbow, which will be preliminary. So I just want to emphasize there'll be corrections based on information like Sandy's information and any other information you give me in the next 2 weeks, but I'll be using information from the urban water management plan. So when I revise this analysis next month, it'll still be subject to revision, and I'll finalize it for August. I just wanted to lay out that timetable because we're but so that's why I did what I did today.
Sandy, I see your hand up again. Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Hanneman, I'd like to thank you for your work. We would like to meet with you. I think there's some factual issues we need to go through with you that I think will relate to the conclusion. So we would like to set that up as soon as possible.
Now, let me say, I'm working with your documents, the CAFA, and the adopted budget, kind of tearing my hair out trying to reconcile them. And I wanted to, in another world, I would have just picked up a phone to a bunch of people and say, what is the number here? Because I'm spinning my wheels trying to guess. But I thought the best way to proceed was to lay out this analysis so it gives you my framework. And then there'd be a chance to get input both from the authority and from Fallbrook and Rainbow and Eastern or whatever as appropriate. So that's the sense in which I knew today was going to be very rough, even if the microphone had worked perfectly. But there's a bunch of homework between now and our next meeting to nail down details. And it's for Adam to decide what's the best format to do this, whether it's a meeting with everybody or whatever. But that makes sense because I was struggling to disaggregate the CAFA, and there's no way you can do it without access to the underlying detail.
Well, I definitely understand how difficult it is. And I think that's why it would be important maybe for all of us to meet with you with regard to the data and how it's been categorized. So just would be happy to do that. And I would suggest that until that meeting happens, and I think it's just like the first portion is that there would be no publishing of the report until we have the opportunity to sit down and go through the data, which I think is your plan.
Of course, and I think so. And so I will be more than happy to coordinate a meeting of such with you, Sandy, and we can talk offline once this meeting ends to coordinate that.
That'd be great.
Any other committee members have any questions or comments for Dr. Hanneman? Okay, seeing none or hearing none, I will actually take this quick time to, oh, Keem, saw your hand just go up. Go ahead.
Thank you. As Sandy and Jack mentioned, Dr. Hanneman, this is very helpful in kind of getting a telegraph of how you're going to do this lifting and provide some independent thoughts on rate impact. So one question that I was having is I understand that you're basing a lot of your principal analysis on year 2020, right? And you may have covered this, but just some thoughts and or questions. You could choose which if there are questions or comments. One is, all right, 2020 COVID, half the year was COVID. Does that create any substantive issues to the point where one might look at 2019 as a control year? And then separately, one thing that LAFCO, and this is also a comment for the committee as well, that one thing that we're trying to get I think staff is trying to get our hands around is this idea of both the here and now, which is Fallbrook-Rainbow have asked to leave the water authority. And we've asked you, Dr. Hanneman, to instruct us as to the potential impacts of that on these three particular topics. But then we also know that water uses are evolving irrespective of Fallbrook-Rainbow. Presumably they're decreasing on a per capita basis. Maybe not, I'll defer to you as the expert. But then we also know that other agencies of the Water Authority have their own local water source projects in play. What, if any, does that impact you on water rates? And then as you look forward, right, the third question that we're asking you to contemplate is there a potential exit fee? So the issue of COVID in your year of analysis, and then this issue of just the evolution of water use demands on a per capita basis, coupled with, we know Oceanside, we know San Diego are all contemplating and moving towards their own source supplies. How does that play into topic of water rate impacts and the topic of potential exit fees?
I'm glad you mentioned both those questions because they're on my mind. With regard to COVID, fiscal 2020 is through June of last year. So maybe COVID, started in March. So it will have had, let me put it this way, it would have had a bigger impact on calendar 2020 than fiscal 2020. That's and maybe it'll have a bigger impact on fiscal 2021 than it did on fiscal 2020. I don't know. And of course, we're now in a drought, which is going to complicate things also. But that was a reason the adopted budget was for fiscal 2020 and fiscal 2021. So I could have considered fiscal 2021 if I wanted. I wouldn't have the CAFA with which to compare it. But I decided to stay away from fiscal 2021 because of COVID, because I figured it would be affected more by COVID than fiscal 2020. So that's how I tried to deal with it. With regard to evolving water uses, I have a few thoughts. I'll lay them out more fully next month and continue in August. But let me just make a few very tentative comments, but then not fleshed out. This comes down to the cost of reliability and the value of reliability. If you think, if the numbers I put down are $777 to get water from Met, and I forget what the 1,000 and whatever it was from 1,028, let's say, from Colorado River, and 2,700 from Carlsbad. Let's say those numbers are correct, and I realize that they may not be, but suppose they. So if you were starting on a clean slate, you'd say, let me buy all the $700 water from Met, and then let me buy Colorado River water. And frankly, you'd say, I don't need desal. That's if you had but of course, the Met water is the least reliable because Met has lower water rights on the Colorado River than Imperial and therefore the authority. And it's relying on the State Water Project, which is, under pressure for reasons we know. So if there was no difference in reliability, hell, you'd get the $700 water and not spend anything else. The only reason to get other water is if is because it's more reliable. And the question is that worth it? That's one thing. The other thing, though, is with all water, the fixed costs are a big deal. So you kind of can't waltz into to Imperial and say, well, this year I only want 28,000 acre feet, but next year I might take 200,000. It doesn't work like that. You have to make commitments. And the commitments make these things a fixed cost. So the question is it worth making it? And the commitment gives reliability because they are committing X thousand acre foot to you. So this is something that I've come to recognize, I think, more strongly in the last couple of weeks doing the analysis. The reliability issue is very much at the center of this. It affects the cost of water. It affects the quantities of water that can be delivered. And that, of course, is going to be a judgment for the commission to make, not for me. One more related thing. As the local agencies develop more local supplies, that reduces the need for water from metropolitan. It also reduces everybody's need for water from, that reduces the need for water from the authority, but it also reduces everybody's need for metropolitan. And both the authority and metropolitan as wholesalers have a system that is largely fixed cost. And so, as I said in, I think, my second slide, if you have a cost structure dominated by fixed costs and there's less requirement for deliveries, that's financially disadvantageous to a wholesaler. That's true for the authority and it's true for metropolitan. I think, but I haven't verified this. So what I'm about to say, I will check this for next month. My impression is, my preliminary impression is the authority actually has a more robust revenue structure than metropolitan. I haven't had a chance, that's from a very preliminary glance at the data. And so I'll I'll look at this more definitely for next month. So you can't. But my preliminary casual impression is metropolitan's revenue structure is more problematic and is likely to be changed towards fixed charges, roughly in the direction of the authority. I don't mean, identical, but I think, and that would then affect, if that's right, that'll affect the rates charged to Eastern and in turn to Rainbow and Fallbrook. That's all to be figured out for the next installment. And as I say, it's at this point speculation, so we'll have to see. But that's also why I put off Fallbrook and Rainbow to next month, because there's a whole ton of work trying to understand the authority. And now that I think I understand the authority's revenue and cost structure, I need to do a parallel analysis for metropolitan. And I have lined up the documents, but that's a bunch of work that I haven't yet had time to. So the issues you raise, conservation, as Jack changing, increased local supplies, put a pressure on all water wholesale providers. But as I just said, part of the fixed cost is because they were lining up supplies. And in Metropolitan's case, these things were lined up in the 1960s, and 1980s. And in the authority's case, they were lined up in the 1990s and 2000s. And the question is, you have to make a judgment and you have to make some cost commitments. And 20 years later, the demand structure may change, but it's like if something didn't turn out as you expected, who should bear the cost 20 years later for that? I can't, that's at the end of absolutely the commission, but I'm going to frame that issue next month in July and in August for the commission to think about.
Thank you, Professor.
Sandy, I thought I saw your hand go up, but maybe went down. I don't know if you had any additional questions or comments.
I would just say that I agree with Dr. Hanneman's comments and the breadth of the analysis, the concepts of the analysis very much. And so appreciate those comments.
Jack, hand up again.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks,
Yeah,
Adam.
no, not a problem.
So the last item, and I don't want to get too far in front of this because we have a while before this gets addressed, but Keen did talk a little bit about the framework you're thinking about for the exit fee concept. So we're going to go through this, we're going to figure out, all right, what's the revenue impact of Fallbrook and Rainbow leaving to all other ratepayers? What's that rate impact to everyone else? Now, essentially what we're talking about here isn't what is the law, right? You're not going to go through an exercise by what's the law require. So you're basically looking at and what's legal for rates, more what's fair, I guess, is essentially what you're going to have to get yourself to look at. And so, one of the questions, or what we've raised as Fallbrook and Rainbow essentially is that cost benefit line up with the benefits Fallbrook and Rainbow get for our membership and sort of the unique structure of Fallbrook and Rainbow for water demands, location in the district. So I'm just trying to figure out how do you feel, maybe you haven't gotten there yet, but how are you going to sort of frame that revenue impact then into sort of, all right, what's a fair cost to continue to pay to the water authority?
So first, let me say the issue of an exit fee, I now think will come up more in August than less in July, just because there's a whole bunch of analysis to be done, getting the rate impacts figured out. And I think that that I'll have my hands full between now and our July meeting, sort of doing that. The issue of an exit fee or this, I think I won't actually be able to address till August. I mean, it's one step in the analysis needs to the next step. That's all I'm saying, and so we should think of how that's it's going to come down to questions of costs and benefits. It's also going to involve what costs are fair to put on a party and what benefits are fair to think about. And so the way I expect to handle this is by laying out ways of thinking about this, but not saying sort of, this is the answer, because this is the commission's decision, and it's a waste of my breath going. So I'm evolving a way of looking at this and thinking about this, and I know different parties will have different views, and I want to lay out the information that each party has the information it needs to offer an interpretation that it wants. So that's my answer. And just to repeat, I won't get into that for next month now, I realize, because of the sort of rate impact analysis details that I haven't gotten into.
Keen, I think your hand is up next. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and so this is a response, my own response to member Jack Beebe's comment question, and this is for the entire committee to take in. So the professor's certainly right, as his analysis, and ultimately, right, we have these 3 memos that the professor will ultimately produce for us, tackling each of these topics. And on the concept of, okay, how does the professor deal with assigning value quantifying value on reliability versus cost. Well, he's going to offer up his analysis, but leave it to the commission to sort out ultimately, what it believes to be the aggregate right call. I will offer up to this committee that LAFCO's staff, and I'm going to defer to Adam on how Adam does this. I will like to see the committee ultimately giving thumbs up, straw vote, formal vote, something where this committee and its 10 ultimate members respond to the professor's conclusions and does offer a more definitive recommendation where you qualify and quantify however you see fit, so that I take that into my analysis, into staff's analysis, and bring it forward to the commission. So at the end of the day, I do see that this committee is actually going to make that call on its own for purposes of then forwarding it on to the commission.
Thank you, Keen. And yeah, from my perspective, we will ultimately work toward that goal. And I think the spirit and intent of creating this ad hoc was to have that added value of a recommendation to be presented to LAFCO staff and eventually the commission. So as I see it from my perch, that's something that will be ultimately worked towards. Is there any other committee members that have any questions or comments? I'm not seeing or hearing anything more, so I will at this point in time check in with Tammy and Erica to see if there are any.
This is Tom.
Tom, I think you're trying to chime in. I'm getting a little feedback from you as well, but why don't you take a crack at it and see if we can interpret what you're saying.
Sounds like he fell down a canyon or something.
He did say he was driving, so.
Can you hear me?
No,
No.
Tom, you are very, very delayed and very, very hard to comprehend what you would even try to suggest on asking or commenting on. So, yeah, we'll push through Tom and maybe he can work
Adam,
through.
this is Tom. You hear me? I am. I
Tom, are you there?
apologize. I'm driving. I'm a parent. So, but I Professor was talking about. I think I'll let Jack take it up then.
Yeah, I think he's a little delayed. So Jack, maybe you can work with him on any type of communication that he wanted to express, and we.
Yes. Yeah, Adam, I'm going up to grade now. I'll have to try again later.
Okay. I'll move at this point in time for ask LAFCO staff, Tammy and Erica, if there's any members of the public that have submitted any pre-comments or questions at this time, or if there's anybody of the members of the public that are in queue to provide any comments or questions as well.
Adam, we have not received any pre-registered speakers for this item.
Thank you, Tammy. And is there any members of the public in queue, Erica?
As of right now, no live email comments have been received.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think that will conclude Dr. Hanneman's reports for items 5B and 5C. We will now move on to item 5D, which is the executive officer report. And Keen will give us an update on the current MSR for Fallbrook-Rainbow and its coordinated review with the proposals before us. So Keen.
Thank you, Adam. And so quickly, with Robert Berry retiring, Linda Heckenkamp on staff has stepped up and is starting to put together the agency profiles. There are 3 entities, of course, involved, not just Fallbrook-Rainbow, but also North County Fire. So we do have to add them to the list. So the Fallbrook-Rainbow profiles, I believe, are in the hands of both agencies, Jack and Tom, as an administrative review. We've asked Ed Sprague, many of you know, who's our fire service consultant, to help us move along the North County Fire section of our MSR. Right now, that's actually the item that's fallen a little bit behind. But nevertheless, I believe that we're holding to our updated timeline. And presumably as early as August, this group will see some form of that MSR immediately after the commission sees it in draft form. And we will certainly take comments on it at that time, and perhaps even maybe have a formal staff presentation on the key items that we come up with at that moment. So other than that, be happy to take any questions, Adam.
Thank you, Keen. Are there any questions for Keen and his brief update on the MSR? Okay, having seen none or hear none, we will move on to the next item, which is item 5E, and it's the agenda setting for next meeting. Just want to provide some quick opportunity for any of the committee members to provide any input that they feel necessary that may be of importance to be on the next agenda. Okay, having seen none or hear none for that, I think that concludes this meeting, and I want to thank everybody for their participation. Oh, Keen, before I get out of here, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to just actually ask you, Adam, and then the committee's thoughts. So we're now transitioning, and Holly could jump in too. Sooner than later, we're probably going to need to start meeting in person. And the coordination therein of getting 10 people in a room and everything. And so I just wanted to put that out there. So, we have July will be video, perhaps August, but, as we start moving towards September, October, we're going to need to start thinking about the location and all the mechanics that go into in-person meetings. So just a comment on that topic.
I'll jump in on that, because this morning the governor issued an order that addressing a lot of his outstanding executive orders, and he extended to September 30. The timeline for us to continue to meet remotely, suspending those parts of the Brown Act that allow us to do so. So we have through September 30. We don't have to take all that time, but we have at least until then. So certainly in October, right now, we should expect that we're going to have to go back to in-person meetings, and who knows what new rules may come out between now and then, but that's what we need to keep in mind for planning.
And then Holly, just so your stream of thought here, is it reasonable to assume that so long as Mr. Hanneman is able to invite the stranger John Doe from Scottsdale to be in his room while he takes the call, he can continue to participate remotely in Scottsdale?
I actually think that restriction applies to members of the committee and would not apply to Dr. Hanneman. So he will not have to invite a stranger, but I think he can continue to participate remotely. We just have to figure out the technology part of it, so members of the public that are showing up in person, we'll project him on a big screen or something so that they can hear him.
Thank you. Okay, so it sounds like we have the ability to meet remotely until September 30th, and then we will, at that point in time, have to work out the logistics of how we meet in person and work with and coordinate with all the member agencies and committee members. So food for thought for now, but we'll keep that on our radar. Okay, without further ado, I want to thank everybody for their participation. Our next scheduled meeting is July 12th at 10 a.m. And at this point in time, I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 11:42 a.m. and thank you again.
Aye.